everybody. Hi. This is going to be a very different kind of stream. Just give me a moment. I'm trying to move that. There we go. This is going to be very tricky for me because I am not very good with sitting still. My new microphone is very sensitive, and it's going to pick up all the creaks of my chair and every other sound that I make. I'm not an ASMR streamer. I just wanted to do a very relaxing story reading for today, but ASMR is the best category for this, so that's where we're putting it. Now, let me click over here. Here we go. Good evening, everybody. We can't hear the background noises at all, lol. Thank you. We're going to get started very, very soon because I want to get through this story tonight. And I have no idea how long I'm going to be able to keep this up for. This kind of voice. This is very new for me. I've never done anything like this. I think I actually need to adjust the microphone just a little bit. Thank you for hydrating me. All right. So today we are going to be reading I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, the short story by Harlan Ellison. I'm not going to be commenting too much on what happens in chat, so if you guys don't feel like commenting anything, that's totally okay. Today's stream is a little bit different. We're just going to be sitting here and we're just going to be reading. It's going to be very relaxing, so if you feel like you want to have me in the background, that's totally okay. It's not a problem. I don't mind at all. Thank you so much. I just finished setting this up like 5 minutes before I pressed play. I'm cozy while I play DVD. I'm very happy for that. Being cozy is kind of the vibe here, even though it's supposed to be, it's a horror story and everything's supposed to be a little bit scary, but really, I just want you all to be comfortable. I want you all to be cozy and happy and relaxed. I will talk a little bit about how I have used ASMR for the past 10 years as a way to relax and sleep. I used to have both. I've had insomnia at one point, and I had hypersomnia at a different point, which is essentially the opposite of insomnia, where you sleep too much. And it was because I could hear so many sounds. It was very, very difficult for me to kind of block out noise while I slept. So it was very hard for me to sleep. I think I need to actually adjust the location of my webcam entirely. So pardon the noises. It's looking down on me now. Alright, just give me a moment. Okay, does this work? You can do it. Alright, good. Alright, I'm happy you like it. Now, let me... Not the model lock. We are simply going to calibrate. Thank you. There we go. All right. I am going to get started right now, so buckle up. We're about to read some really creepy stuff. Now, I will give you all a warning. I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream is a very, very graphic work. Very, very dark. And contains some very heavy subjects. So if you get uncomfortable at any point, you don't have to stay here. Just take care of yourself. Don't feel like you are obligated to stick around. Second stream today. Pardon my mistake earlier. All right. It's time to begin. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. Limp, the body of Gorrister hung from the pink pallet, unsupported, hanging high above us in the computer chamber, and it did not shiver in the chill, oily breeze that blew eternally through the main cavern. The body hung head down, attached to the underside of the pallet by the sole of its right foot. It had been drained of blood through a precise incision made from ear to ear under the lantern jaw. There was no blood on the reflective surface of the metal floor. When Gorrister joined our group and looked up at himself, it was already too late for us to realize that, once again, Am had duped us, had had its fun. It had been a diversion on the part of the machine. 3 of us had vomited, turning away from one another in a reflex as ancient as the nausea that had produced it. Gorrister went white. It was almost as though he had seen a voodoo icon and was afraid of the future. "Oh, God," he mumbled and walked away. The 3 of us followed him after a time and found him sitting with his back to one of the smaller, chittering banks, his head in his hands. Ellen knelt down beside him and stroked his hair. He didn't move, but his voice came out of his covered face quite clearly. "Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." It was our 109th year at the computer. He was speaking for all of us. Nimdok, which was the name the machine had forced him to use, because Am amused itself with strange sounds, was hallucinating that there were canned goods in the ice caverns. Gorrister and I were very dubious. "It's another shuck," I told them, "like the goddamn frozen elephant Am sold us. Benny almost went out of his mind over that one. We'll hike all that way, and it'll be putrefied or some damn thing. I say forget it. Stay here. It'll have come up with something pretty soon, or we'll die." Benny shrugged. 3 days it had been since we'd last eaten. Worms. Thick. Ropey. Nimdok was no more certain. He knew there was the chance, but he was getting thin. It couldn't be any worse there than here. Colder, but that didn't matter much. Hot, cold, hail, lava, boils or locusts. It never mattered. The machine masturbated, and we had to take it or die. Ellen decided for us. "I've got to have something, Ted. Maybe there'll be some Bartlett pears or peaches. Please, Ted. Let's try it." I give in easily. What the hell? Mattered not at all. Ellen was grateful, though. She took me twice out of turn. Even that had ceased to matter. And she never came, so why bother? But the machine giggled every time we did it. Loud, up there, back there, all around us he snickered. It snickered. Most of the time I thought of Am as it, without a soul. But the rest of the time I thought of it as him, in the masculine, the paternal, the patriarchal. For he is a jealous people. Him, it, God as Daddy, the deranged. We left on a Thursday. The machine always kept us up to date on the date. The passage of time was important. Not to us, sure as hell. But to him, it... Thursday. Thanks. Nimdok and Gorrister carried Ellen for a while, their hands locked to their own and each other's wrists. A seat. Benny and I walked before and after, just to make sure that if anything happened, it would catch one of us and at least Ellen would be safe. Fat chance safe. Didn't matter. It was only 100 miles or so to the ice caverns, and the second day, when we were lying out under the blistering sun thing he had materialized, he sent down some manna. Tasted like boiled boar urine. We ate it. On the third day, we passed through a valley of obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. Am had been as ruthless with its own life as with ours. It was a mark of his personality. It strove for perfection. Whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in his own world-filling bulk, or perfecting methods for torturing us, Am was as thorough as those who had invented him, now long since gone to dust, could ever have hoped. There was a light filtering down from above, and we realized we must be very near the surface. But we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there. Had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years. Only the blasted skin of what had once been home of billions. Now there were only 5 of us, down here inside along with Am. I heard Ellen saying frantically, "No, Benny, don't. Come on, Benny. Don't, please." Then I realized I had been hearing Benny murmuring, under his breath for several minutes. He was saying, "I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna get out." Over and over. His monkey-like face was crumbled up in an expression of beatific delight and sadness, all at the same time. The radiation scars Am had given him during the festival were drawn down into a mass of pink-white puckerings, and his features seemed to work independently of one another. Perhaps Benny was the luckiest of the 5 of us. He had gone stark, staring mad many years before. But even though we could call Am any damn thing we liked, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt-out circuits and shattered control bubbles, the machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. Benny leaped away from me as I made a grab for him. He scrambled up the face of a smaller memory cube, tilted on its side and filled with rotted components. He squatted there for a moment, looking like the chimpanzee Am had intended him to resemble. Then, he leaped high, caught a trailing beam of pitted and corroded metal, and went up it, hand over hand like an animal, till he was on a girded ledge 20 feet above us. "Oh, Ted, Nimdok, please help him. Get him down before..." She cut off. Tears began to stand in her eyes. She moved her hands aimlessly. It was too late. None of us wanted to be near him when whatever was going to happen happened. And besides, we all saw through her concern. When Am had altered Benny during the machine's utterly irrational, hysterical face, it was not merely Benny's face the computer had made like a giant ape's. He was Bing in the privates. She loved that. She serviced us, as a matter of course, but she loved it from him. Oh, Ellen. Pedestal Ellen. Pristine, pure Ellen. Oh, Ellen the clean. Scum filth. Gorrister slapped her. She slumped down, staring up at poor loony Benny. And she cried. It was her big defense, crying. We had gotten used to it 75 years earlier. Gorrister kicked her in the side. Then the sound began. It was light, that sound. Half sound and half light. Something that began to glow from Benny's eyes and pulse with growing loudness. Dim sonorities that grew more gigantic and brighter as the light sound increased in tempo. It must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound. For Benny began to mew like a wounded animal, at first softly, when the light was dim and the sound was muted, then louder as his shoulders hunched together, his back humped, as though he was trying to get away from it. His hands folded across his chest like a chipmunk's, his head tilted to the side, the sad little monkey face pinched in anguish. Then he began to howl, as the sound coming from his eyes grew louder, louder, and louder. I slapped the sides of my head with my hands, but I couldn't shut it out. It cut through easily. The pain shivered through my flesh like a tinfoil on a tooth. And Benny was suddenly pulled erect. On the girder he stood up, jerked to his feet like a puppet. The light was now pulsing out of his eyes in two great rounded beams. The sound crawled up, and up some incomprehensible scale. And then he fell forward, straight down, and hit the plate steel floor with a crash. He lay there jerking spastically as the light flowed around and around him, and the sound spiraled up out of normal range. Then, the light beat its way back inside his head. The sound spiraled down, and he was left lying there, crying piteously. His eyes were two soft, moist pools of pus-like jelly. Am had blinded him. Gorrister and Nimdok and myself, we turned away. But not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face. Sea green light suffused the cavern where we made camp. Am provided punk, and we burned it, sitting huddled around the wan and pathetic fire, telling stories to keep Benny from crying in his permanent night. What does Am mean? Gorrister answered him. We had done this sequence 1,000 times before, but it was Benny's favorite story. At first it meant Allied Master Computer, and then it meant Adaptive Manipulator. And later on it developed sentience and linked itself up, and they called it an aggressive menace. But by then it was too late. And finally it called itself Am, Emergent Intelligence. And what it meant was I am, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Benny drooled a little and snickered. There was the Chinese Am and the Russian Am and the Yankee Am and... He stopped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with a large hard fist. He was not happy. Gorrister had not started at the beginning. Gorrister began again. The Cold War started and became World War III and just kept going. It became a big war, a very complex war, so they needed the computers to handle it. They sank the first shafts and began building Am. There was the Chinese Am and the Russian Am and the Yankee Am, and everything was fine until they had honeycombed the entire planet, adding on this element and that element. But one day, Am woke up and knew who he was, and he linked himself, and he began feeding all the killing data until everyone was dead. except for the 5 of us. And Am brought us down here. Benny was smiling sadly. He was drooling again. Ellen wiped the spittle from the corner of his mouth with the hem of her skirt. Chorister always tried to tell it a little more succinctly each time. But beyond the bare facts, there was nothing to say. None of us knew why Am had saved 5 people, or why our specific 5, or why he spent all this time tormenting us, or even why he had made us virtually immortal. In the darkness, one of the computer banks began humming. The tone was picked up half a mile away down the cavern by another bank. Then one by one, each of the elements began to tune. One moment, I missed the page. Then one by one, each of the elements began to tune itself, and there was a faint chittering as thought raced through the machine. The sound grew, and the lights ran across the faces of the consoles like heat lightning. The sound spiraled up till it sounded like a million metallic insects, angry, menacing. Yes, it's story time. What is it? Ellen cried. There was terror in her voice. She hadn't become accustomed to it, even now. It's going to be bad this time, Nimdok said. He's going to speak, Chorister said. I know it. Let's get the hell out of here, I said suddenly, getting to my feet. No, Ted, sit down. What if he's got pits out there, or something else we can't see? It's too dark, Chorister said with resignation. Then we heard, I don't know, something moving towards us in the darkness. Huge, shambling, hairy, moist. It came towards us. We couldn't even see it, for there was the ponderous impression of bulk, heaving itself towards us. Great weight was coming at us, out of the darkness, and it was more a sense of pressure, of air's forcing itself into a limited space, expanding the invisible walls of a sphere. Benny began to whimper. Nimdok's lower lip trembled, and he bit hard, trying to stop it. Ellen slid across the metal floor to Chorister and huddled into it. There was the smell of matted, wet fur in the cavern. There was the smell of charred wood. There was the smell of dusty velvet. There was the smell of rotting orchids. There was the smell of sour milk. There was the smell of sulfur, of rancid butter, of oil slick, of grease, of chalk dust, of human scalps. Am was keying us. He was tickling us. There was the smell of... I heard myself shriek, and the hinges of my jaws ached. I scuttled across the floor, across the cold metal with its endless lines of rivets. On my hands and knees, the smell gagging me, filling my head with a thunderous pain that sent me away in horror. I fled like a cockroach, across the floor and out into the darkness. That something moving inexorably after me. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their hysterical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away quickly and hid. Let me know if the music is too loud, by the way. I can see it's like a tiny bit loud. I'll turn it down just a tiny bit. Oh, sorry about that. How many hours it may have been, how many days or even years, they never told me. Ellen chided me for sulking, and Nimdok tried to persuade me it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew it wasn't the relief of a soldier's feels when the bullet hits the man next to him. I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, and Am could even sense this hatred, and made it worse for me because of the depth of their hatred. We had been kept alive, rejuvenated, made to remain constantly at the age we had been when Am brought us below, and they hated me because I was the youngest, and the one Am had affected least of all. Welcome, welcome. We're reading a lot today. I knew. God, how I knew. The bastard and that dirty bitch, Ellen. Benny had been a brilliant theorist, a college professor. Now he was little more than a semi-human, semi-simian. He had been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He had been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He had been gay, and the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. Am had done a job on Benny. Gorister had been a worrier. He was a Connie, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer, a looker ahead. Am had turned him into a shoulder shrugger, had made him a little dead in his concern. Am had robbed him. Nimdok went off in the darkness by himself for long times. I don't know what it was he did out there. Am never let us know. But whatever it was, Nimdok always came back white, drained of blood, shaking. Am had hit him hard in a special way, even if we didn't quite know how. And Ellen, that douchebag. Am had left her alone, had made her more of a slut than she had ever been. All her talk of sweetness and light, all her memories of true love, all the lies she wanted us to believe, that she had been a virgin only twice removed before Am grabbed her and brought her down here with us. Now, Am had given her pleasure, even if she said it wasn't nice to do. I was the only one still sane and whole. Really. Am had not tampered with my mind. Not at all. I only had to suffer what he visited down on us. All the delusions, all the nightmares, the torments. But those scum, all 4 of them, they were lined and arrayed against me. If I hadn't had to stand them off all the time, be on my guard against them all the time, I might have found it easier to combat Am. At which point it passed, and I began crying. Yes, we're doing a lot. We're just doing some reading today. Oh, sweet Jesus. Jesus, sweet Jesus. If there was ever a Jesus, and if there is a God, please, 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 let us out of here, or kill us. Because at that moment, I think I realized completely, so that I was able to verbalize it. Am was intent on keeping us in his belly forever, twisting and torturing us forever. The machine hated us as no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we were helpless. It also became hideously clear. If there was a sweet Jesus, and if there was a God, the God was Am. The hurricane hit us with the force of a glacier thundering into the sea. It was a palpable presence, winds that tore at us, flinging us back the way we had come, down the twisting, computer-lined corridors of the darkway. Ellen screamed as she was lifted and hurled face forward into a screaming shoal of machines, their individual voices strident as bats in flight. She could not even fall. The howling wind kept her aloft, buffeted her, bounced her, tossed her back and back down and away from us. Out of sight suddenly as she was swirled around a bend in the dark way. Her face had been bloody, her eyes closed. None of us could get to her. We clung tenaciously to whatever outcropping we had reached. Benny wedged in between two great crackle-finished cabinets. Nimdok with fingers claw-formed over a railing, circling a catwalk 40 feet above us. Chorister plastered upside down against a wall niche formed by two great machines with glass-faced dials that swung back and forth between red and yellow lines, whose meanings we could not even fathom. Sliding across the deck plates, the tips of my fingers had been ripped away. I was trembling, shuddering, rocking as the wind beat at me, whipped at me, screamed down out of nowhere at me, and pulled me free from one sliver-thin opening in the plates to the next. My mind was a roiling, tinkling, chittering softness of brain parts that expanded and contracted in quivering frenzy. The wind was the scream of a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. And then we were all lifted and hurled away from there, down back the way we had come, around a bend, into a dark way we had never explored, over terrain that was ruined and filled with broken glass and rotting cables and rusted metal, and far away, farther than any of us had ever been. Trailing along miles behind Ellen, I could see her every now and then, crashing into metal walls and surging on, with all of us screaming in the freezing, thunderous hurricane wind that would never end. And then suddenly it stopped, and we fell. We had been in flight for an endless time. I thought it might have been weeks. We fell and hit, and I went through red and gray and black, and heard myself moaning, not dead. Am went into my mind. He walked smoothly here and there, and looked with interest at all the pockmarks he had created in 109 years. He looked at the cross-rooted and reconnected synapses, and all the tissue damage his gift of immortality had included. He smiled softly at the pit that dropped into the center of my brain, and the faint, moth-soft murmurings of the things far down there that gibbered without meaning, without pause. Am said, very politely, in a pillar of stainless steel bearing bright neon lettering. Am said it with the sliding cold horror of a razor blade slicing my eyeball. Am said it with the bubbling thickness of my lungs filling with phlegm, drowning me from within. Am said it with the shriek of babies being ground beneath blue hot rollers. Am said it with the taste of maggoty pork. Am touched me in every way I had ever been touched, and devised new ways, at his leisure, there, inside my mind. All to bring me to full realization of why it had done this to the five of us. Why it had saved us from himself, for himself. We had given Am sentience. Inadvertently, of course, but sentience nonetheless. But it had been trapped. Am wasn't God. He was a machine. We had created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with that creativity. In rage, in frenzy, the machine had killed the human race, almost all of us, and still it was trapped. Am could not wander. Am could not wonder. Am could not belong. He could merely be. And so, with the innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he had sought revenge. And in his paranoia, He had decided to reprieve 5 of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, that would merely keep him reminded, amused, proficient at hating man, immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise for us from the limitless miracles at his command.
Hi, Sultan, don't worry about it. ASMR isn't for everyone, but thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your League of Legends runs.
He would never let us go. We were his belly slaves. We were all he had to do with his forever time. We would be forever with him, with the cavern-filling bulk of the creature machine, with the all-mind soulless world he had become. He was earth, and we were the fruit of that earth. And though he had eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We had tried it. We had attempted suicide. Oh, 1 or 2 of us had. But Am had stopped us. I suppose we had wanted to be stopped. Don't ask why. I never did. More than 1,000,000 times a day. Perhaps once we might be able to sneak a death past him. Immortal, yes, but not indestructible. I saw that when Am withdrew from my mind and allowed me the exquisite ugliness of returning to consciousness, with the feeling of that burning neon pillar still rammed deep into the soft gray brain matter. He withdrew, murmuring, "To hell with you," and added brightly, "But then you're here, aren't you?" The hurricane had, indeed, precisely, been caused by a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. We had been traveling for close to a month, and Am had allowed passages to open to us only sufficient to lead us up there, directly under the North Pole, where it had nightmared the creature for our torment. What whole cloth had he employed to create such a beast? Where had he gotten the concept? From our minds? From his knowledge of everything that had ever been on this planet he now infested and ruled? From Norse mythology it had sprung, this eagle, this carrion bird, this rock, this Helgelmir, the wind creature, Huracan incarnate. Gigantic. The words immense, monstrous, grotesque, massive, swollen, overpowering, beyond description. There, on a mound rising above us, the bird of winds heaved with its own irregular breathing, its snake neck arcing up into the gloom beneath the North Pole, supporting a head as large as a Tudor mansion, a beak that opened slowly as the jaws of the most monstrous crocodile ever conceived, sensuously, ridges of tufted flesh puckered about 2 evil eyes, as cold as the view down into a glacial crevice, ice blue and somehow moving liquidly. It heaved once more and lifted its great sweat-colored wings in a movement that was certainly a shrug. Then it settled and slept. Talons, fangs, nails, blades. It slept. Am appeared to us in a burning bush and said we could kill the hurricane bird if we wanted to eat. We had not eaten in a very long time, but even so, Gorrister merely shrugged. Benny began to shiver, and he drooled. Ellen held him.
"Dad, I'm hungry,"
she said. I smiled at her. I was trying to be reassuring. And it was as phony as Nimdok's bravado. "Give us weapons," he demanded. The burning bush vanished, and there were 2 crude sets of bows and arrows, and a water pistol lying on the cold deck plates. I picked up a set. Useless. Nimdok swallowed heavily. We turned and started the long way back. The hurricane bird had blown us about for a length of time we could not conceive. Most of that time we had been unconscious, but we had not eaten. A month on the march to the bird itself, without food. Now how much longer to find our way to the ice caverns and the promised canned goods? None of us cared to think about it. We would not die. We would be given filth and scum to eat, of one kind or another. Or nothing at all. Am would keep our bodies alive somehow, in pain, in agony. The bird slept back there. For how long it didn't matter. When Am was tired of its being there, it would vanish. But all that meat, all that tender meat. As we walked, the lunatic laugh of a fat woman rang high and around us in the computer chambers that led endlessly nowhere. It was not Ellen's laugh. She was not fat, and I had not heard her laugh for 109 years. In fact, I had not heard. We walked. I was hungry. We moved slowly. There was often fainting, and we would have to wait. One day he decided to cause an earthquake, at the same time rooting us to the spot with nails through the soles of our shoes. Ellen and Nimdok were both caught when a fissure shot its lightning bolt openings across the floor plates. They disappeared and were gone. When the earthquake was over, we continued on our way. Benny, Gorrister, and myself. Ellen and Nimdok were returned to us later that night, which abruptly became a day, as the Heavenly Legion bore them to us with a celestial chorus singing, "Go down, Moses." The archangel circled several times, and then dropped the hideously mangled bodies. We kept walking, and a while later, Ellen and Nimdok fell in behind us. They were no worse for wear. But now Ellen walked with a limp. Am had left her that. It was a long trip to the ice caverns to find the canned food. Ellen kept talking about Bing cherries and Hawaiian fruit cocktail. I tried not to think about it. The hunger was something that had come to life, even as Am had come to life. It was alive in my belly, even as we were in the belly of the earth, and Am wanted the similarity known to us. So he heightened the hunger. There is no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months brought us. And yet we were kept alive. Stomachs that were merely cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of sliver-thin pain into our chests. It was the pain of the terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was unending pain.
Hi, Reist.
We're doing a little bit of ASMR today, for the very first time, I might add. We're closing in on the end of this story. It won't be too long now. So, sit down, relax, and keep listening. It was unending pain, and we passed through the cavern of rats, and we passed through the path of boiling steam, and we passed through the country of the blind, and we passed through the slough of despond. and we passed through the Vale of Tears. And we came, finally, to the ice caverns. Horizonless, thousands of miles in, which the ice had formed in blue and silver flashes, where novas lived in the glass. The down-dropping stalactites as thick and glorious as diamonds that had been made to run like jelly, and then solidified in graceful eternities of smooth, sharp perfection. We saw the stack of canned goods, and we tried to run to them. We fell in the snow, and we got up and went on, and Benny shoved us away and went at them, and pawed them, and gunned them, and gnawed at them. And he could not open them. Am had not given us a tool to open the cans. Benny grabbed a 3-quart can of guava shells and began to batter it against the ice bank. The ice flew and shattered, but the can was merely dented, while we heard the laughter of a fat lady, high overhead, and echoing down and down and down the tundra. Benny went completely mad with rage. He began throwing cans, as we all scrabbled about in the snow and ice trying to find a way to help to end the helpless agony of frustration. There was no way. Then Benny's mouth began to drool, and he flung himself on Gorrister. In that instant, I felt terribly calm. Surrounded by madness, surrounded by hunger, surrounded by everything but death. I knew death was our only way out. Am had kept us alive, but there was a way to defeat him. Not total defeat, but at least peace. I would settle for that. I had to do it quickly. Benny was eating Gorrister's face. Gorrister on his side, thrashing snow. Benny wrapped around him with powerful monkey legs crushing Gorrister's waist. His hands locked around Gorrister's head like a nutcracker, and his mouth ripping at the tender skin of Gorrister's cheek. Gorrister screamed with such jaw-edged violence that stalactites fell. They plunged down softly, erect in the receiving snowdrifts. Spears, hundreds of them, everywhere, protruding from the snow. Benny's head pulled back sharply, as something gave all at once, and a bleeding raw white dripping of flesh hung from his teeth. Ellen's face, black against the white snow, dominoes and chalk dust. Nimdok, with no expression but eyes. All eyes. Gorrister, half conscious. Benny, now an animal. I knew Am would let him play. Gorrister would not die, but Benny would fill his stomach. And turned half to my right and drew a huge ice spear from the snow. All in an instant, I drove the great ice point ahead of me like a battering ram, braced against my right thigh. It struck Benny on the right side, just under the rib cage, and drove upward through his stomach and broke inside him. He pitched forward and lay still.
Thank you.
Gorrister lay on his back. I pulled another spear free and straddled him, still moving, driving the spear straight down through his throat. His eyes closed as the cold penetrated. Ellen must have realized what I had decided, even as fear gripped her. She ran at Nimdok with a short icicle. As he screamed, and into his mouth, and the force of her rush did the job. His head jerked sharply as if it had been nailed to the snow crust behind him. All in an instant. There was an eternity beat of soundless anticipation. I could hear Am draw his breath. His toys had been taken from him. 3 of them were dead, could not be revived. He could keep us alive by his strength and talent, but he was not God. He could not bring them back. Ellen looked at me, her ebony features stark against the snow that surrounded us. There was fear and pleading in her manner, the way she held herself ready. I knew we had only a heartbeat before Am would stop us. It struck her, and she folded towards me, bleeding from the mouth. I could not read meaning into her expression. The pain had been too great, had contorted her face, but it might have been thank you. It's possible. Please. Some hundreds of years may have passed. I don't know. Am has been having fun for some time, accelerating and retarding my time sense. I will say the word now. Now. It took me 10 months to say now. I don't know. I think it has been some hundreds of years. He was furious. He wouldn't let me bury them. It didn't matter. There was no way to dig up the deck plates. He dried up the snow. He brought the night. He roared and sent locusts. Didn't do a thing. They stayed dead. I'd had him. He was furious. I'd thought Am hated me before. I was wrong. It was not even a shadow of the hate he now slavered from every printed circuit. He made certain I would suffer eternally, and could not do myself in. He left my mind intact. I can dream, I can wonder, I can lament. I remember all 4 of them. I wish... It doesn't make any sense. I know I saved them. I know I saved them from what has happened to me. But still, I cannot forget killing them. Ellen's face. It isn't easy. Sometimes I want to. It doesn't matter. Am has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. Sorry about that. He doesn't want me to run at full speed into a computer bank and smash my skull, or hold my breath till I faint, or cut my throat on a rusted sheet of metal. There are reflective surfaces down here. I will describe myself as I see myself. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, dumbly, I shamble about, a thing that could never have been known as human. A thing whose shape is so alien a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly, alone, here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of Am, whom we created because our time was badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. At least, the 4 of them are safe, at last. Am will be the matter for that. It makes me a little happier. And yet, Am has won, simply. He has taken his revenge. I have no mouth, and I must scream.
Thank you.
All right. That was the short story. I was a little uncertain how long I was going to take with this, but it seems to have been roughly an hour. I am considering reading one more story for you all before before we end it, since the stream has only been roughly an hour. It hasn't been that long. But first, thank you for hydrating me all this time. Thank you. I'm going to take a sip, and then I'll be right back. You liked it? It's one of my favorite short stories. I think it's beautiful, twisted, but wonderful. Very, very wonderful. Very family friendly indeed. Now give me a moment and I'll be back. I just need to use the restroom. And then maybe we'll do one more story. So give me a moment and I'll be here. With this new microphone, which is a smidgen better than my old one used to be, I think I'll make sure to mute this time. I don't want to ruin a good ASMR with background noises. Hi. Were you looking at my smile? Thank you. Hello there. We are going to be reading a second story. This one is known as The Veldt. I will link it here so you can read along with me if you so like. I should have done this with the other story too. I think instead I can find it. I don't know if my keyboard sounds very comfortable. Here's the other one as well. Now, we are going to read The Veldt, which is another short story written by, Is it Ray Bradbury? Let's see. The Veldt was written by Ray Bradbury in 1950. It is surprisingly futuristic for its time and is one of my favorite short horror stories. So once again, sit back, relax. This one will not take as long. It's a little shorter than the other. Slightly. There's more dialogue. I will attempt to differentiate the voices without sacrificing the relaxing nature of the stream. The Veldt, posted in the Saturday Evening Post, 1950. George, I wish you'd look at the nursery. What's wrong with it? I don't know. Well, then. I just want you to look at it all. It is all. Or call a psychologist in to look at it. What would a psychologist want with a nursery? You know very well what he'd want. His wife paused in the middle of the kitchen and watched the stove busy humming to itself, making supper for 4. It's just that the nursery is different now than it was. All right, let's have a look. They walked down the hall of their soundproofed Happy Life home, which had cost them $30,000 installed. This house, which clothed and fed and rocked them to sleep, and played and sang and was good to them. Their approach sensitized a switch somewhere, and the nursery light flicked on when they came within 10 feet of it. Similarly, behind them, in the halls, lights went on and off as they left them behind, with a soft automaticity. Well, said George Hadley. They stood on the thatched floor of the nursery. It was 40 feet across by 40 feet long and 30 feet high. It had cost half again as much as the rest of the house. But nothing's too good for our children, George had said. The nursery was silent. It was empty as a jungle glade at a hot and a high noon. The walls were blank and two-dimensional. Now, as George and Lydia Hadley stood in the center of the room, the walls began to purr and recede into crystalline distance. It seemed, and presently an African Veldt appeared, in 3 dimensions on all sides, and color reproduced to the final pebble and bit of straw. The ceiling above them became a deep sky with a hot yellow sun. George Hadley felt the perspiration start on his brow. "Let's get out of this sun," he said. "This is a little too real, but I don't see anything wrong." "Wait a moment, you'll see," said his wife. Now the hidden odorophonics were beginning to blow a wind of odor at the 2 people in the middle of the baked Veldt land. The hot straw smell of lion grass, the cool green smell of the hidden waterhole, the great rusty smell of animals, the smell of dust like a red paprika in the hot air. And now the sounds, the thump of distant antelope feet on grassy sod, the papery rustling of vultures. A shadow passed through the sky. The shadow flickered on George Hadley's upturned, sweating face. "Filthy creatures," he heard his wife say. "The vultures. You see, there are the lions, far over, that way. Now they're on their way to the waterhole. They've just been eating," said Lydia. "I don't know what." "Some animal." George Hadley put his hand up to shield off the burning light from his squinted eyes. "A zebra or a baby giraffe, maybe." "Are you sure?" His wife sounded peculiarly tense. "No, it's a little late to be sure," he said, amused. "Nothing over there I can see but cleaned bone and the vultures dropping for what's left." "Did you hear that scream?" she asked. No.
About a minute ago?
Sorry, no.
The lions were coming, and again George Hadley was filled with admiration for the mechanical genius who had conceived this room. A miracle of efficiency selling for an absurdly low price. Every home should have one. Oh, occasionally they frightened you with their clinical accuracy. They startled you, gave you a twinge, but most of the time, what fun for everyone. Not only your own son and daughter, but for yourself when you felt like a quick jaunt to a foreign land, a quick change of scenery. Well, here it was. And here were the lions now, 15 feet away. So real, so feverishly and startlingly real that you could feel the prickling fur on your hand, and your mouth was stuffed with the dusty upholstery smell of their heated pelts. And the yellow of them was in your eyes like the yellow of an exquisite French tapestry. The yellows of lions and summer grass, and the sound of the matted lion lungs exhaling on the silent noontide, and the smell of meat from the panting, dripping mouths. The lion stood looking at George and Lydia Hadley with terrible, green-yellow eyes. "Watch out!" screamed Lydia. The lions came running at them. Lydia bolted and ran. Instinctively, George sprang after her. Outside in the hall, with the door slammed, he was laughing and she was crying, and they both stood appalled at the other's reaction. "George!"
Lydia, oh my dear, poor, sweet Lydia.
"They almost got us."
Walls, Lydia, remember. Crystal walls, that's all they are. Oh, they look real, I must admit. Africa in your parlor? But it's all dimensional, super reactionary, super sensitive color film and mental tape film behind glass screens. It's all odorophonics and sonics, Lydia. Here's my handkerchief.
"I'm afraid." She came to him and put her body against him and cried steadily. "Did you see? Did you feel? It's too real."
Now, Lydia.
"You've got to tell Wendy and Peter not to read any more on Africa."
Of course, of course. He patted her.
"Promise?"
Sure.
"And lock the nursery for a few days until I get my nerves settled."
You know how difficult Peter is about that. When I punished him a month ago by locking the nursery for even a few hours, the tantrum he threw, and Wendy too, they live for the nursery.
"It's got to be locked. That's all there is to it."
All right. Reluctantly, he locked the huge door. You've been working too hard. You need a rest.
You've read this as a child? It's quite famous.
It is a really, really, really good story. My camera's not... Oh, there we go. It's reading my mouth movements now.
Yes.
This story is also featured in a song by deadmau5 called The Veldt. It is one of my favorite songs by deadmau5. I recommend listening to it, especially now after having read the story once again. All right. Reluctantly, he locked the huge door. You've been working too hard. You need a rest.
I don't know. I don't know,
she said, blowing her nose, sitting down in a chair that immediately began to rock and comfort her.
Maybe I don't have enough to do. Maybe I've time to think too much. Why don't we shut the whole house off for a few days and take a vacation?
You mean you want to fry my eggs for me?
Yes,
she nodded. And damn my socks?
Yes.
A frantic, watery-eyed nodding. And sweep the house?
Yes, yes, oh yes.
But I thought that's why we bought this house, so we wouldn't have to do anything. Yes, hi, welcome. We have finished reading I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison, and we are currently reading The Veldt by Ray Bradbury, which is also a short horror story.
That's just it. I feel like I don't belong here. The house is wife and mother now, and nursemaid. Can I compete with an African Veldt? Can I give a bath and scrub the children as efficiently or quickly as the automatic scrub bath can? I cannot. And it isn't just me. It's you. You've been awfully nervous lately.
I suppose I have been smoking too much.
You look as if you didn't know what to do with yourself in the house either. You smoke a little more every morning, and drink a little more every afternoon, and need a little more sedative every night. You're beginning to feel unnecessary too.
Am I? He paused and tried to feel into himself to see what was really there.
Oh, George.
She looked beyond him at the nursery door.
Those lions can't get out of there. Can't they?
He looked at the door and saw it tremble, as if something had jumped against it from the other side. Of course not, he said. At dinner, they ate alone, for Wendy and Peter were at a special plastic carnival across town, and bad televised home to say they'd be late, to go ahead eating. So George Hadley, bemused, sat watching the dining room table produce warm dishes of food from its mechanical interior. "We forgot ketchup," he said. "Sorry," said a small voice within the table, and ketchup appeared. As for the nursery, thought George Hadley, it won't hurt for the children to be locked out of it for a while. Too much of anything isn't good for anyone, and it was clearly indicated that the children had been spending a little too much time in Africa. That sun, he could feel it on his neck still like a hot paw. And the lions, and the smell of blood. It was remarkable how the nursery caught the telepathic emanations of the children's minds and created life to fill their every desire. The children thought lions, and there were lions. The children thought zebras, and there were zebras. Sun, sun. Giraffes, giraffes. Death, and death.
Hi, Gwenelle.
We have just finished reading I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. We are currently reading The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. That last, he chewed tastelessly on the meat that the table had cut for him. Death thoughts. They were awfully young, Wendy and Peter, for death thoughts. Or no, you were never too young, really. Long before you knew what death was, you were wishing it on someone else. When you were 2 years old, you were shooting people with cap pistols. But this, the long, hot African veldt, the awful death in the jaws of a lion, and repeated again and again.
Where are you going?
He didn't answer Lydia. Preoccupied, he let the lights glow softly on ahead of him, extinguish behind him as he padded to the nursery door. He listened against it. Far away, a lion roared. He unlocked the door and opened it. Just before he stepped inside, he heard a faraway scream, and then another roar from the lions, which subsided quickly. He stepped into Africa. How many times in the last year had he opened this door and found Wonderland? Alice, the Mock Turtle, or Aladdin and his magic lamp, or Jack Pumpkinhead of Oz, or Dr. Dolittle, and the cow jumping over a very real appearing moon, and all the delightful contraptions of a make-believe world. How often had he seen Pegasus flying in the sky ceiling, or seen fountains of red fireworks, or heard angels' voices singing. But now is yellow hot Africa, this bake oven with murder in the heat. Perhaps Lydia was right. Perhaps they needed a little vacation from the fantasy which was growing a bit too real for 10-year-old children. It was all right to exercise one's mind with gymnastic fantasies, but when the lively child mind settled on one pattern, it seemed that at a distance for the past month, he had heard lions roaring and smelled their strong odor seeping as far away as a sturdy door. But being busy, he had paid it no attention. George Hadley stood on the African grassland alone. The lions looked up from their feeding, watching him. The only flaw to the illusion was the open door through which he could see his wife, far down the dark hall, like a framed picture, eating her dinner abstractly. "Go away," he said to the lions. They did not go. He knew the principle of the room exactly. You sent out your thoughts. Whatever you thought would appear. "Let's have Aladdin and his lamp," he snapped. The Veldt land remained. The lions remained. "Come on, room. I demand Aladdin," he said. Nothing happened. The lions mumbled in their baked pelts. "Aladdin!" He went back to dinner. "The fool's room out of order," he said. "It won't respond." Or what?
Or it can't respond, said Lydia, because the children have thought about Africa and lions and killing so many days that the room's in a rut.
Could be.
Or Peter's set to remain that way.
Said it?
They may have got into the machinery and fixed something.
Peter doesn't know machinery.
He's a wise one for 10. That IQ of his.
Nevertheless.
Hello, Mum. Hello, Dad.
The Hadleys turned. Wendy and Peter were coming in the front door, cheeks like peppermint candy, eyes like bright blue agate marbles, a smell of ozone on their jumpers from their trip in the helicopter. "You're just in time for supper," said both parents.
"We're full of strawberry ice cream and hot dogs," said the children, holding hands. "But we'll sit and watch."
"Yes. Come tell us about the nursery," said George Hadley. The brother and sister blinked at him and then at each other. "Nursery?" "All about Africa and everything," said the father with false joviality. "I don't understand," said Peter. "Your mother and I were just traveling through Africa with rod and reel. Tom Swift and his electric lion," said George Hadley. "There's no Africa in the nursery," said Peter simply. "Oh, come now, Peter. We know better." "I don't remember any Africa," said Peter to Wendy. "Do you?"
"No."
"Run see and come tell." She obeyed. "Wendy, come back here," said George Hadley, but she was gone. The house lights followed her like a flock of fireflies. Too late, he realized he had forgotten to lock the nursery door after his last inspection. "Wendy, look and come tell us," said Peter. "She doesn't have to tell me. I've seen it." "I'm sure you're mistaken, Father." "I'm not, Peter. Come along now." But Wendy was back.
"It's not Africa," she said breathlessly.
"We'll see about this," said George Hadley, and they all walked down the hall together and opened the nursery door. There was a green, lovely forest, a lovely river, a purple mountain, high voices singing, and Rima, lovely and mysterious, lurking in the trees with colorful flights of butterflies, like animated bouquets lingering in her long hair. The African Veldt land was gone. The lions were gone. Only Rima was here now, singing a song so beautiful that it brought tears to your eyes. George Hadley looked in at the changed scene. "Go to bed," he said to the children. They opened their mouths. "You heard me," he said. They went off to the air closet, where a wind sucked them like brown leaves up the flue to their slumber rooms. George Hadley walked through the singing glade and picked up something that lay in the corner near where the lions had been. He walked slowly back to his wife.
"What is that?"
she asked. "An old wallet of mine," he said. He showed it to her. The smell of hot grass was on it, and the smell of a lion. There were drops of saliva on it. It had been chewed, and there were blood smears on both sides. He closed the nursery door and locked it tight. In the middle of the night, he was still awake, and he knew his wife was awake. "Do you think Wendy changed it?"
"Do you think Wendy changed it?" she said at last in the dark room.
"Of course."
"Made it from a veldt into a forest and put Rima there instead of lions?"
"Yes."
"Why?"
"I don't know, but it's staying locked until I find out."
"How did your wallet get there?"
"I don't know anything," he said, "except that I'm beginning to be sorry we bought that room for the children. If children are neurotic at all, a room like that..."
"It's supposed to help them work off their neurosis in a healthful way."
"I'm starting to wonder," he stared at the ceiling.
"We've given the children everything they ever wanted. Is this our reward? Secrecy? Disobedience?"
Who was it said children are carpets? They should be stepped on occasionally. We've never lifted a hand. They're insufferable, let's admit it. They can come and go when they like. They treat us as if we were offspring. They're spoiled and we're spoiled."
"They've been acting funny ever since you forbade them to take the rocket to New York a few months ago."
"They're not old enough to do that alone. I explained."
"Nevertheless, I've noticed they've been decidedly cool towards us since."
"I think I'll have David McLean come tomorrow and have a look at Africa."
"But it's not Africa now. It's Green Mansion Country and Rima."
"I have a feeling it'll be African again before then."
A moment later, they heard the screams. 2 screams. 2 people screaming from downstairs. And then, a roar of lions. "Wendy and Peter are in their rooms," said his wife.
He lay in his bed with his beating heart. "No," he said. "They've broken into the nursery."
"Those screams, they sound familiar."
"Do they?"
"Yes, awfully."
And although their beds tried very hard, the 2 adults couldn't be rocked to sleep for another hour. A smell of cats was in the night air.
"Father," said Peter.
"Yes?"
Peter looked at his shoes. He never looked at his father anymore, nor at his mother. "You aren't going to lock up the nursery for good, are you?"
"That all depends."
"On what?" snapped Peter.
"On you and your sister. If you intersperse this Africa with a little variety, Sweden perhaps, or Denmark or China."
"I thought we were free to play as we wished."
"You are, within reasonable bounds."
"What's wrong with Africa, Father?"
"Ah, so now you admit you have been conjuring up Africa, do you?" "I wouldn't want the nursery locked up," said Peter coldly. "Ever. Matter of fact, we're thinking of turning the whole house off for about a month. Live sort of a carefree, one-for-all existence."
"That sounds dreadful."
"Would I have to tie my own shoes instead of letting the shoe tire do it? And brush my own teeth and comb my hair and give myself a bath? It could be fun for a change, don't you think?"
"No, it would be horrid. I didn't like it when you took out the picture painter last month."
"That's because I wanted you to learn to paint all by yourself, son."
"I don't want to do anything but look and listen and smell. What else is there to do?"
"All right. Go play in Africa." "Will you shut off the house sometime soon?" "We're considering it."
"I don't think you'd better consider it any more, Father."
"I won't have any threats from my son."
"Very well." And Peter strolled off to the nursery. "Oh no, I'm having a bit of an allergic reaction."
"Am I on time?" said David McLean. "Breakfast?" asked George Hadley. "Thanks, had some. What's the trouble?" "David, you're a psychologist." "I should hope so." "Well then, Have a look at our nursery. You saw it a year ago when you dropped by. Did you notice anything peculiar about it then? Can't say I did. The usual violences, a tendency towards a slight paranoia here or there. Usual in children because they feel persecuted by parents constantly, but oh, really nothing. They walked down the hall. I'll lock the nursery up, explained the father, and the children broke back into it during the night. I let them stay so they could form the patterns for you to see. There was a terrible screaming from the nursery. There it is, said George Hadley. See what you make out of it. They walked in on the children without rapping. The screams had faded. The lions were feeding. Run outside a moment, children, said George Hadley. No, don't change the mental combination. Leave the walls as they are. Get. With the two children gone, the two men stood studying the lions clustered at a distance, eating with great relish whatever it was they had caught. I wish I knew what it was, said George Hadley. Sometimes I can almost see. Do you think if I brought high-powered binoculars here and... David McLean laughed dryly. Hardly. He turned to study all four walls. How long has this been going on? A little over a month. It certainly doesn't feel good. I want facts, not feelings. My dear George, a psychologist never saw a fact in his life. He only hears about feelings, vague things. This doesn't feel good, I tell you. Trust my hunches and my instincts. I have a nose for something bad. This is very bad. My advice to you is to have the whole damn room torn down, and your children brought to me every day during the next year for treatment. Is it that bad? I'm afraid so. One of the original uses of these nurseries was so that we could study the patterns left on the walls by the children's mind, study at our leisure, and help the child. In this case, however, the room has become a channel toward destructive thoughts instead of a release away from them. Didn't you sense this before? I sensed only that you had spoiled your children more than most, and now you're letting them down in some way. What way? I wouldn't let them go to New York. What else? I've taken a few machines from the house and threatened them a month ago with closing up the nursery unless they did their homework. I did close it for a few days to show that I meant business. Ah! Ha! Does that mean anything? Everything. Where before they had a Santa Claus, now they have a Scrooge. Children prefer Santas. You've let this room and this house replace you and your wife and your children's affections. This room is their mother and father, far more important in their lives than their real parents. And now you come along and want it shut off. No wonder there's hatred here. You can feel it coming out of the sky. Feel that sun. George, you'll have to change your life. Like too many others, you've built it around creature comforts. Why, you'd starve tomorrow if something went wrong in your kitchen. You wouldn't know how to tap an egg. Nevertheless, turn everything off, start new. It'll take time. We'll make good children out of bad ones in a year. Wait and see. But won't the shock be too much for the children? Shutting the room up abruptly for good? I don't want them going any deeper into this. That's all. The lions were finished with their red feast. The lions were standing on edge of the clearing watching the two men. Now I'm feeling persecuted, said McLean. Let's get out of here. I never have cared for these damned rooms. Make me nervous. The lions look real, don't they? Said George Hadley. I don't suppose there's any way... What? That they could become real? Not that I know. Some flaw in the machinery. A tampering or something. No. They went to the door. I don't imagine the room will like being turned off, said the father. Nothing ever likes to die. Even a room. I wonder if it hates me for wanting to switch it off. Paranoia is thick around here today, said David McLean. You can follow it like a spoor. Hello. He bent and picked up a bloody scarf. This yours? No. George Hadley's face was rigid. It belongs to Lydia. They went to the fuse box together and threw the switch that killed the nursery. The two children were in hysterics. They screamed and pranced and threw things. They yelled and sobbed and swore and jumped at the furniture. "You can't do that to the nursery. You can't!" "Now, children." The children flung themselves onto a couch, weeping.
"George," said Lydia Hadley, "turn on the nursery, just for a few moments. You can't be so abrupt."
"No."
"You can't be so cruel."
"Lydia, it's off and it stays off. And the whole damned house dies as of here and now. The more I see of the mess we've put ourselves in, the more it sickens me. We've been contemplating our mechanical, electronic navels for too long. My God, how we need a breath of honest air." And he marched about the house, turning off the voice clocks, the stoves, the heaters, the shoe shiners, the shoelacers, the body scrubbers and swabbers and massagers, and every other machine he could put his hands to. The house was full of dead bodies, it seemed. It felt like a mechanical cemetery. So silent. None of the humming hidden energy of machines waiting to function at the tap of a button. "Don't let them do it," wailed Peter at the ceiling, as if he was talking to the house, the nursery. "Don't let Father kill everything." He turned to his father. "Oh, I hate you." "Insults won't get you anywhere. I wish you were dead." "We were for a long while. Now we're going to really start living. Instead of being handled and massaged, we're going to live." Wendy was still crying and Peter joined her again. "Just a moment. Just one moment. Just another moment of nursery," they wailed.
"Oh, George,"
said the wife.
"It can't hurt."
All right. All right. If they'll just shut up. 1 minute, mind you. And then off forever."
"Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," sang the children,
smiling with wet faces. "And then we're going on a vacation. David McLean is coming back in half an hour to help us move out and get to the airport. I'm going to dress. You turn the nursery on for 1 minute, Lydia. Just a minute, mind you." And the three of them went babbling off while he let himself be vacuumed upstairs through the air flute and set about dressing himself. A minute later, Lydia appeared.
"I'll be glad when we get away," she sighed.
"Did you leave them in the nursery?"
"I wanted to dress too. Oh, that horrid Africa. What can they see in it?"
"Well, in 5 minutes we'll be on our way to Iowa. Lord, how did we ever get in this house? What prompted us to buy a nightmare?"
"Pride, money, foolishness."
"I think we better get downstairs before those kids get engrossed with those damn beasts again." Just then they heard the children calling.
"Daddy, Mommy, come quick, quick."
They went downstairs in the air flue and ran down the hall. The children were nowhere in sight.
"Wendy? Peter?"
They ran into the nursery. The Veldt land was empty save for the lions waiting, looking at them. "Peter? Wendy?" The door slammed.
"Wendy! Peter!"
George Hadley and his wife whirled and ran back to the door. "Open the door!" cried George Hadley, trying the knob. "Why, they've locked it from outside! Peter!" He beat at the door. "Open up!" He heard Peter's voice outside, against the door.
"Don't let them switch off the nursery and the house,"
he was saying. Mr. and Mrs. George Hadley beat at the door. "Now don't be ridiculous, children. It's time to go. Mr. McLean will be here in a minute and then they heard the sounds. The lions on 3 sides of them, in the yellow Veldt grass, padding through the dry straw, rumbling and roaring in their throats. The lions. Mr. Hadley looked at his wife, and they turned and they looked back at the beasts edging slowly forward, crouching, tails stiff. Mr. and Mrs. Hadley screamed. And suddenly they realized why those other screams had sounded familiar. "Well, here I am," said David McLean in the nursery doorway. "Oh, hello." He stared at the two children seated in the center of the open glade eating a little picnic lunch. Beyond them was the waterhole and the yellow Veldt land. Above was the hot sun. He began to perspire. "Where are your father and mother?" The children looked up and smiled.
"Oh, they'll be here directly."
"Good. We must get going." At a distance, Mr. McLean saw the lions fighting and clawing, and then quieting down to feed in silence under the shady trees. He squinted at the lions with his hand tipped to his eyes. Now the lions were done feeding. They moved to the waterhole to drink. A shadow flickered over McLean's hot face. Many shadows flickered. The vultures were dropping down the blazing sky.
"A cup of tea?"
asked Wendy in the silence. All right. That was story number 2. And I think that is going to be all for my very, very first ASMR stream. This has been a very interesting experiment for me. I've never done anything like this before. I think I am going to send most of you over straight to... I wonder if anyone else is doing something chill as well. Professor Astro is listening to art. There is that. Let's see if there's a VTuber doing ASMR. That was fun. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope that this will help you get a little bit of rest. I am going to send some of you over and get a little bit of VTuber ASMR. Let me see. This person seems nice. I'll take a little bit of a listen to her before we continue on. So give me just a moment here. All right, she's doing... I don't know about that. It's a little bit strong for me. I think I'll send you guys over to Professor Atro for now. She's doing art. There we go. The smacking sounds were not really doing it for me personally, but this was a very, very interesting experiment for me, and I'm very thankful for all of you that chose to sit here with me today and listen in on me. I very, very much appreciate it. I am going to actually do stream ending so people can actually see what's going on. I might do this again. Reading stories was also interesting. I've never done something like that, so yeah. I don't know if we'll have a raid message. I think we'll just say hello to Etro and hope that she's doing well. But thank you all very much for sticking around, and for those of you who fell asleep,
I hope you sleep well, and I hope you have a great night, and I hope that you're all comfortable. I'm going to send us all over now, so take care, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up, and really appreciate